So my introductory remarks are very brief. I just want to introduce those who will give the introductory remarks to today's event. So I'll introduce all the speakers now, and then they will speak in order. First, we have Michael Hamilton, who's legal advisor on the right to protest at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International. Then we have Francesca Fanucci, who's head of law and policy at the European Centre for Not-for-Profit Law. And finally, Hélène Tigroudja, who's a member of the UN Human Rights Committee. And I just want to remark very, very briefly that the last time I saw all three of these people in person happened to be in early 2020 in Switzerland. And that's something about the genesis of today's events as well. So I saw them in Lyon in Switzerland in the last stages of the work that went into the UN Human Rights Committee's General Comment 37 on the right of peaceful assembly. That was just before the pandemic lockdown, and it was in those discussions actually and in Lyon that the genesis of the Oxford Handbook on Peaceful Assembly occurred, and so it's very nice to be, and fitting I think, that we start today's proceedings with introductory remarks from our three speakers. So thank you, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to stay seated, if that's okay. It genuinely is a real pleasure to welcome everyone here this morning, and as Sharath has said, some of you have travelled a considerable distance to be part of this assembly. And with my Amnesty hat on, I just first want to thank you all for being here, and to thank my co-conveners at the European Centre for Not-for-Profit Law and the Centre of Governance and Human Rights for making today possible. At Amnesty, some of you will know that we've had a global campaign over the past 4 years or so to protect the protest. And one of the perennial questions in any discussion of the right to protest concerns its effectiveness and how effectiveness might actually be measured. One thing, though, that's beyond question, and something truly remarkable and inspiring, is the bravery and the tenacity of protesters in countries across the world. People take to the streets in spite of deeply repressive laws, confronting discrimination, facing down police violence, and demanding accountability, often at great human cost. Some of these protests create political openings, such as the student-led protests in Nepal at the end of last year, or in Bangladesh in July, August 2024. Sometimes those moments of euphoria fade and subside, and sometimes they're never reached. At the start of this year, the amazing researchers in Amnesty's Iran team documented, I think, the most chilling account that I have ever read, recording how, in the course of the killing of many thousands of protesters, hospitals were overrun by security forces. There was systematic surveillance and identification of protesters who were injured. Medical equipment was removed. Emergency procedures were denied. Arrests and disappearances happened from emergency rooms and intensive care units. And despite the fact that medical workers themselves were subjected to threats, interrogations, arrest, and forced disappearances, clandestine networks of medical care emerged as protesters avoided hospital out of fear of death or detention. And I hope that today we will be able to think about how better we can use human rights law, or indeed other tools, to make it possible for people to challenge the political cultures that accommodate, excuse, and even reinforce repression. How can we challenge the logics, the technologies, the practices that underpin these kind of practices? Sharath mentioned early 2020 in Lyon, and Hélène may say more about this, and the Human Rights Committee's general comment that was also the focus of that weekend. And I would encourage people to watch Albie Sachs's video. He speaks of how the right of peaceful assembly speaks to something primordial. One of the questions that generated a certain level of friction that weekend, and it's a question that we might also revisit today, concerns the distinction between assembly and protest. Assemblies are not only protests, and the right in some ways is much more expansive, capturing more mundane, more quotidian ways of coming together. And without for a second suggesting that this assembly is in any way mundane or ordinary, it's not a protest, it really is wonderful to have such a loose coalition of activists and academics, including anthropologists and ethnographers, scholars of social movements, policing, surveillance, crowd psychologists, political scientists, social geographers, weapons experts, lawyers of every hue, critical, constitutional, criminal. Have I missed anyone? It's great to have you all here, and I am hugely looking forward to today, and I hope you are too. I'll leave it at that. Francesca, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Sharath, and for the opportunity to co-convene this symposium. This morning, actually, as I was traveling here, I first was driving my son to school. He has got GCSEs, big stress, but that's another thing, you may relate. But on the way to school, the traffic was particularly slow. And as we approached the school, we realized why it was the case. There was a protest, and there was a convening of teachers' union, who were showing signs, basically calling for changes of the contract, etc. And they were partially obstructing the road. But what I really found pleasing, lifted my spirits, was that the cars, like mine, instead of complaining, they were honking the horns in solidarity. They were lowering down and cheering, and yes, and these people, thank you. So needless to say that I also honked the horn like there was no tomorrow. But I thought it was really a good scene setter for today. Because let me tell you, Michael has already outlined this. For us, working with activists and human rights defenders on the ground, we do see that the right of peaceful assembly, including the right to protest, but not only, is increasingly under strain, now more than ever. And just to mention more examples, unfortunately, we face legislation that criminalizes or otherwise grossly replaces peaceful disruption, including cases of civil disobedience, acts of civil disobedience that are conducted not only in physical spaces, but also in the digital sphere, and for matters that are in the public interest. We are facing increasing surveillance, which unfortunately is catalyzed, facilitated by new and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence. And this causes chilling effects not only on our rights to freedom of assembly, but to a plethora of our rights: privacy, association, right to participation in policy making, freedom of expression. And last but not least, I would like to point out that what we are really worried about is that we face a creeping normalization of the idea that assemblies and protests in general are a problem that needs to be managed rather than a right that needs to be not only protected but also positively facilitated. So to me, today, this convening between scholars, lawyers, and activists is really exactly what we need more of. And I know that the conversation between us sometimes may be a bit, not easy, because we don't share the same language, or we have different priorities, or we don't understand the same issues in the same way. But nevertheless, if we want to find constructive solutions to the challenges that we are facing, we really need the combination of expertise that comes from all of us that are gathered in these rooms. We need your academic depth, we need your legal rigor, but you also, and we need the lived experiences of the people that are exercising their right, or at least that are trying to exercise their right. So once again, I really warmly thank you for making room for this conversation, and we are here to listen, to contribute, but also to take back what we learned from you into the spaces where this is most needed. And I really look forward to a rich and productive discussion day. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm also very pleased to be here, and I fully agree with what was said by Michael and Francesca. It's a very important gathering, so not only, as you said, for hearing from you, but also for the Human Rights Committee to use your expertise, your knowledge, and it was indeed for the drafting process of this General Comment 37 absolutely instrumental. And I remember, so the drafting of this General Comment started in 2019, and I just arrived in the Human Rights Committee, so I was rather silent, I think, in the process, because I was observing my colleagues and they were very experts and so on. But I really enjoyed the process. And of course, late Christoph Heinz was absolutely marvelous in this gathering, not only expertise from members of the Human Rights Committee, but also hearing from you, experts, practitioners, members of civil society organizations and academics. And I remember also there were on the substance maybe 3 or 4 points where the role of civil society and academics was absolutely critical. For instance, non-discrimination. I remember that in the first version of the General Comment, the way non-discrimination in the use of the right to peaceful protest was addressed was not very elaborated. And I remember we received some critical comments by civil society saying, okay, but you totally disregard the differentiated impact of for instance, obstacles on the right to peaceful protest. And that's something that was actually integrated in the second version of the General Comment. And more importantly, the online element. And I really remember that it was something brought from a Cambridge meeting in December 2019, yeah, exactly. Totally forgotten in the first version. We were in 2019, so before the Zoom area, before the Google meeting and so on. And this is something based on the gathering you had with Christoph and other members of the Human Rights Committee, saying that maybe also this online dimension of protest should be included. And indeed, now we have in the final version of the General Comment 37 something on online protest. And of course, it was just before COVID, so just before we discovered the interest of virtual meetings, protests, and so on and so forth. So here to say, as Francesca mentioned, here to say that indeed treaty bodies cannot do anything, cannot set any standards without the knowledge, without the expertise of practitioners, of academics, of civil society, of users of the right. And Glion indeed was a very important moment. So now I'm also using, and I'm closing with this, I'm also using this opportunity to call for your expertise, because we are, probably you know that the Human Rights Committee is drafting a new General Comment, so 38, yes, on Article 22. And I remember the Human Rights Committee first tried to adopt a single General Comment on 21 and 22, but then the committee realized that it was impossible to gather in just one document 2 rights that, of course, have similarities and connections, but also that are quite different. So we are in this process. We have adopted the first reading document, so it's on our website, the website of the Human Rights Committee, in French, in English, and in Spanish. And please feel free to comment, to criticize, to send informally, formally, any kind of comments, especially if you think there are, again, as the online element, if you think that there are some very important things that are missing. I'm expecting some pushback from states, because the first version was written based on civil society experts and academics, and special rapporteur Gina is in the room, input, but not based on states' input. So now I'm expecting, of course, to receive some, states pushback probably on extraterritorial obligations or transnational repression and so on and so forth. So the more we receive from experts, very strong inputs, I think the better it is also for finalizing the version of this general command. So inputs can be sent until the end of June, but of course we can also extend a little bit the deadline. And if you also want to have, online consultation, formal consultation, informal consultation, I would be very happy. I'm the rapporteur of the general command, so that's why I'm saying this. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for giving me this possibility to do the call for inputs. Thank you.